and thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about how to improve workplace performance on a shoestring budget whilst also avoiding what we call the data abyss. And so I'm going to start with the conclusion. This is where we're getting to today. Data and analytics can help to improve workplace performance. I think we already know that. Data's been around for quite some time, and a lot of people have been talking about it for quite some time. However, it takes a significant amount of resources to do properly, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. For those on a shoestring budget, a viable alternative is actually to focus on proactive success habits, meaning that in some cases, less is more. And we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that as well. Here is a common challenge that most business leaders, in fact, most people in the workplace would know quite a bit about. Here we are at a moment in time, and there's a goal or intention or vision, something we want to be able to achieve in the future. Of course, getting in the way of this challenge or achieving the goal is what many people are calling VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. One of the goals then of most business leaders and most workplaces, of course, is how do we reduce VUCA? And how do we reduce the amount of uncertainty and ambiguity that we have? And of course, this is normally the response. Well, everyone's saying we should collect more information, more data. Why don't we go and do that? Of course, what that means is that it's easy to fall into what I call the data abyss. We've got so much information, we don't even know where we are anymore. The questions that really should be mattering are, how do we make the right decisions? How do we do this consistently? And how do we do it with our resource constraints that are in place? I'd like to share with you 6 data illusions that everyone, I think, should know about. The first illusion is called the street lamp effect, where some data is better than no data. In this story, a man is looking for his wallet underneath a street lamp, and a policeman finds him, comes across, and eventually starts joining the man to try and find his wallet. After a little while, actually asks the question, is this where you lost your wallet? And the man replies, well, actually, I lost it in the park, but this is where the light is. Just because something is convenient or available doesn't make it complete. In fact, the impact of incomplete or ambiguous data is significant. Illusion 2 is the story that averages can sometimes mistakenly tell. I'm not sure if you play golf. I do a little bit. Most of my shots do what shot 1 and shot 2 is describing here on the screen. But the fact is that if I can take the average of my shots, turns out that I'm a brilliant golfer. So averages often mask what the true story is. And here's another way to describe the same problem. The laws of averages don't always tell us the story we need to really know about. Illusion 3 is that by understanding the parts, we can understand or better understand the whole. And the story here, of course, that I'm going to use is one about 6 blind men and an elephant who've never actually seen or touched an elephant before. And on doing so, each grabs a different part of the story and makes a different misunderstanding about the way things really are. This reductionist analysis sometimes adds more confusion, and it's much more common than you might otherwise think. Illusion 4 is that historical data can reliably predict the future. Of course, sometimes it can, but sometimes it's not always great at doing that. I like to think of data as falling into 2 different categories: behavior that is largely predictable and behavior that is largely unpredictable. So let's take a baseball. A baseball, the angle that it comes onto the bat and leaves the bat is largely predictable. But a baseball game is a different story. The behavior of a computer is largely predictable, but how it gets used, according to the person who's using it, is largely unpredictable. Data is actually predictable when it comes to looking at it in a hard copy form, but the behavior or the action that comes as a result of the recommendations is another thing. Illusion 5 is that we found the cause to something that we've been looking for. Of course, causation doesn't necessarily stem from correlation. They're 2 different concepts. Here you can see that the correlation between the abundance of crude oil and how often people travel to chicken restaurants is extremely close, but one could argue that one doesn't cause the other. The same can be said about chocolate consumption and people who win Nobel Prizes. Or here, chips are so expensive, they make people fall out of their wheelchairs. Look at that beautiful correlation. One doesn't cause the other. And finally, illusion 6, that opinions are facts. If you look at the bottom left, you'll see that the same bit of information, the same diagram, the same number, is interpreted very differently by two different people. On the top right, you might remember that social media around the world went into a meltdown when people felt that the same dress was actually two very different colors. The way that facts present themselves are, I like to put them into 4 buckets. Unknowable facts, things you just simply can't know in the future. Like the weather, we don't know what it's going to be like exactly on this day, this time next year. Ambiguous facts, things that we're not quite sure about because there's a lot of missing information. Mistaken facts, we think that something's true, and actually it's not. And actual true facts, things that people cannot argue about. The funny thing about facts is that in that last bucket, very few things actually fit into it. So in summary, after all those illusions, what I'm really trying to say is that the chances that data will power better decisions, better consistent decisions, which is what one of our original goals was, is lower than most people think. So if there are all the problems, how do you do data properly? Well, the hint I'm going to drop before I even get started is that it's very costly. The main reason why it's costly is because there's a trade-off between the time that it takes to actually collect great data, the cost, of course, to collect great data, and the quality of the information that you can actually grab. If you've got a lot of money or a lot of resources, then it may not be a problem. But if not, it can be a problem, and here's why. To do data properly, it takes a substantial amount of accurate and reliable information to be both collected and then stored. A substantial effort by everyone to ensure that data is entered and collected properly, so there's a time factor there. Specific skills to know exactly what data to collect, but also how to properly analyze it. And then a commitment to trust whatever comes out at the other end. Otherwise, what are we using it for? Here's a great slide from DataWatch. So data can be your worst enemy or your best friend. I think this sums it up pretty well. The figure on the left is that 45% of companies for a survey lack the big data needed to make better major business decisions. And 76% want more data sources to be able to make more informed choices. Now, if you think about how much data has already been collected and companies saying they want to be able to get more, interesting. From the same study, leveraging data is time consuming and inefficient. So this is not me saying it. This is a result of a lot of surveys that are already taken place. 90% of all potential usable data needs data preparation, time, effort. 35% of organizations have a robust data preparation process. Okay. 80% of an analyst's time, so analysts are pretty expensive, 80% of their time is spent on data preparation. And 93% believe that they're losing revenue due to their inability to leverage data. So this is exactly what's been happening. Data's been around for quite some time, and still people aren't finding that the value is there. But here's something that I really wanted to cover off. The path to accidental chaos is certainly one which someone needs to be really wary of. Think about this for a moment. In order to analyze data, it needs to exist. This requires a data footprint, which requires effort, as we've seen. Now, conversations, personal conversations are a critical part of the success in any workplace. Digital conversations create a data footprint to analyze, but they lack context. If you think about an instant message or anything to do with any form of electronic conversation, misunderstandings always happen, and misunderstandings can be very expensive. The best conversations are actually those that happen offline, but of course they rarely collect data. People aren't recording conversations. People aren't always recording meetings. So if we're encouraging more digital conversations so we can collect more information to analyze what's happening, are we creating bigger problems? And that's just a question that I'd like you to consider. Another key question that I'd like you to consider is, with a limited budget and finite resources, what are the chances of collecting more data and using it to make better decisions? We gave ourselves the challenge to find a way to improve workplace performance without sacrificing employee experience. And a key assumptions we made when we were going through this challenge is, let's assume that we don't have the resources to collect and analyze the data that we think we probably need to make brilliant decisions. And so the key success indicator about whether we met our challenge or not would be to develop a solution that is sustainable and suitable for other workplaces, not just ours. So this is what we did. The thing that popped into our minds straight away was actually the fact that historical data estimates the future. With limited resources, are we better off influencing directly both the present and the future? And so this started leading us down a path which actually became quite exciting. Simple, but exciting. The thing we started wondering about is, what is it that we can get proactive about rather than reactive about so that it puts us in a better position to succeed? And we started thinking about if we went through a simple mind shift, so rather than getting better at collecting and analysing historical data, surveys and reviews, and we still thought that those things were important, okay, so we're not talking about eliminating them, but if we actually focus on getting better at influencing the future through key behaviours and actions in the present, would we be better off? And so we started making a list of things we should get proactive about, and here are 4 things that we ended up with. The first one is, let's get proactive about knowing what really matters to the future. So in other words, let's create the future or create the best vision of the future so that everyone knows then the really important goals and outcomes that they're looking to move towards. In other words, remove the unnecessary clutter so that we can focus on things that are really important. Then, what needs doing in the present? So with that as the anchor, rather than the past being the anchor, we can identify the highest leverage key behaviours and actions that will make the biggest difference to achieving the things that are really important. And these are the things that we thought, right, if we're going to measure anything, let's focus on measuring these things, these leading metrics. Then, all we really need to do is focus on how are we going. So with everyone focused on sharing real information, and this is key, it was everyone's responsibility to share real information, not pretend information, real information about progress, about things that really matter, and also how we're going about the things that we really needed doing, which put us in a position to be able to ask the question about what needs adjusting at the moment. So here we've got a future that we know we're aiming towards. We know what we're doing. We're asking ourselves, how are we going? And then let's make it everyone's responsibility to know what needs adjusting and then to go and do that. Those are the 4 things we came up with. And we turn those 4 questions into what we call a performance drumbeat. In other words, what really matters, what needs doing, are we doing it, and how do we go? These are questions that we thought if everyone across the workplace could answer at any given time, and we turn it into a continuous cycle, we'd be in a wonderful position to make sure that we're focusing on things that really matter and reducing the amount of unnecessary chaos in the workplace. Also, collecting less data about things that didn't really matter is something we didn't have to worry about anymore. So to summarize all of this in simple terms, most businesses seem to think that they've got a choice between one of 2 angles to take. Either we go down the predictive route or we go down the gut feel habit route. And what we're suggesting is that with the sensible use of both, you can collect a small amount of highly useful data, and you can implement some proactive success habits. And combining those 2 things is going to give you the best result on a shoestring. Improved workplace performance is something that can absolutely be achieved without necessarily going and introducing the unnecessary chaos that the data abyss can create. So here's a few simple tips to improve workplace on a shoestring budget. The first most important one, I think you can gather from most of this presentation, is that don't collect data just because it's what everyone else is doing. There's plenty of companies out there who are going to say that data is the answer. And the thing I'd just like you to consider is that consider where that information is coming from. Vendors are very good at suggesting that data is the answer to all of the problems. It's actually not. Be super clear about things that matter. That's been a recurring theme throughout the presentation. And most importantly, remove unnecessary clutter. By removing things that are unimportant and making sure that people aren't getting distracted by data that doesn't matter is going to give everyone an opportunity to focus in on things that they really need to do to be able to succeed in their job. If you are going to collect data, and this is something we would definitely recommend, collected about the things that we would describe as lead behaviors and actions. That's going to be different for every business, and I haven't gone too much into exact examples of that today. But if you think about the root cause of an effect is what we're talking about. The root cause of a salesperson achieving their target is likely to be not just the number of appointments that they go on, but the number of qualified leads and appointments they go on, and the number of proposals, potentially, that they provide to those. So that's an example of something that the lead measure leads to the lag measure. Help everyone find their challenge zone. So it's super motivating for someone to have a type of stretch target, but super deflating for it to be impossible to achieve. Also, if it's not challenging enough, well, most people will find that they just fall into a zone of non-challenge and therefore don't really try all that hard. So helping people to find their challenge zone is a big key to all of this. Also, if context is required, fostering a culture of conversation. So in other words, not just conversations for the sake of it, that's not going to make much of a difference at all, but encouraging real conversations to happen about things that really matter is super important. The amount of context that can be lost in an electronic conversation, it might take 3 or 4 exchanges to clarify something that could be spoken about in 30 seconds to a minute. So make sure that you're fostering those types of conversations. And finally, establish what your success habits are. We've gone through a couple of them today, but making sure that they're clear, but most importantly, that everyone has agreed to and committed to them, and they're the same for everyone, employees, leaders, everyone who's involved. If everyone's committing to those, that they're clear, then you're in a pretty good position to continue to move forward without having to collect crazy amounts of data. And so here we are back at the conclusion again. Now, data and analytics can help to improve workplace performance and success. There's no doubt about it. Okay, there is no doubt about it. It can. However, it does take a significant amount of resources to do it properly. And for those on a shoestring budget, which let's face it, is a lot of organizations these days, the viable alternative is to focus on proactive success habits and adopt a less is more strategy and approach to data. I'd just like to talk about employee surveys for a second. Employee surveys have become extremely popular in recent times because they're cost effective and provide a clear path for analysis, particularly with modern day software. But of course, they are severely impacted by the 6 data illusions, which we spoke about earlier, which means that results are really easy to misinterpret. What we do is ask 4 questions that tell us everything that we need to know about an employee's current experience. So the level of enjoyment they have in their role as part of the company, satisfaction with key elements of the employee experience. So we can ask that in actually just 1 question. What is currently annoying them? So rather than asking 50 questions about things that we want to ask about, let's just ask them what is currently annoying them about their experience, and most importantly, what they would do to fix it, because they're at the coalface of the organization. So they'll probably have a pretty good idea. It also, to be honest, helps us to keep things that aren't important out of the mix. If someone's annoyed about something, part of our culture is we want to make sure that they also suggest how we should fix it. And that way we can listen in a much more effective way. So remember, the more questions you ask about things that don't really matter, the more unnecessary chaos you're likely to create. And that's where we're going to leave it today. My name is Jason Buchanan. Before I go, I just wanted to give you a little bit about my background. I haven't properly introduced myself to you as of yet. I've been lucky enough to work on the global leadership team of 2 very large organizations that do surveys and data for a living. I've also been both within and outside of HR and recruitment for a number of years, which gives me a perspective of things from outside of the industry. Given that I've also been working largely for small and medium-sized businesses for the last couple of years, most of this is based on the experience that I've personally had as well as what people have told us when we're consulting to them. And that is that, what do? We don't have much of a budget. What are we going to be able to do about it? I hope I've been able to help. Thank you very much.